There is a persistent illusion in modern business creation. It is the image of the isolated inventor, working in secret to construct a flawless machine, fully expecting that once it is finally revealed, the market will immediately reward the effort. But a newly built machine sitting dormant in the dark, no matter how perfectly built, has zero commercial value. Most founders operate under a specific professional misconception. They treat revenue as a lagging indicator, a natural consequence that will inevitably arrive once the product reaches perfection, the branding is polished, and the company looks like a mature enterprise. This traditional sequence is a fatal mistake. The distance between the initial idea and the first dollar collected is the most dangerous terrain in business creation. It is filled with flattering conversations, shallow interest, and false signals that burn through limited capital. Founders who spend months refining internal details while their competitors secure live transactions are building fragile organizations masquerading as successful ones. They assume they are reducing risk by planning, when they are actually avoiding the only test that matters. This split-screen diagram illustrates the contrast. The top path is the timeline of death, long, smooth blocks of planning and perfecting that end in a sheer cliff when the money runs out. The bottom path is the timeline of survival, a rapid, jagged loop of creating a narrow offer, conducting a paid test, and adjusting based on where money actually changes hands. That bottom timeline demonstrates that sales cannot be the final step after strategy. Revenue must be treated as the first hard proof that the market is willing to exchange money for value under live conditions. Revenue serves as the primary building material. In the early stage, it isn't the finish line. It's the structural foundation. It finances learning, exposes weak assumptions, and forces the business to take its true shape. To build with revenue, we have to strictly define market validation. There is a vast, dangerous gap between what a market applauds in theory and what it actually purchases in practice. This validation matrix separates false positives from true commercial traction. Soft signals, website traffic, verbal praise, fall through the top, carry only zero economic weight. True demand appears when transferred money introduces sacrifice. Financial actions hit the bottom mesh, forming the only reliable basis for decision-making. This is why unpaid pilots and informal expressions of interest are traps. A business that accepts long lead times and uncontrolled delays is financing the customer's hesitation, instead of the customer financing the startup's growth. You must also reframe how you view price resistance. A prospect who argues over the price, negotiates scope, and pushes for milestones is displaying a stronger survival signal than a prospect who politely praises the offer but indefinitely delays the purchase. Real demand survives contact with commercial friction. It survives pricing discussions, survives contract boundaries, and delivery timelines. Weak demand evaporates the moment the exchange ceases to be theoretical. Cash flow is the ultimate diagnostic instrument. It exposes weak deals, filters out low-quality customers, and strips away founder optimism to reveal pure market truth. The pursuit of perfect information creates a false sense of control. Founders frequently confuse endless internal preparation with actual commercial discipline, delaying their market entry to polish the product. Product perfection is a disguised form of risk avoidance. It allows the founder to remain safely inside a controlled environment, protecting their ego while quietly bleeding the company's runway dry. This chart models the economics of uncertainty. Traditional planning burns capital at a steady rate while market knowledge remains flat. The alternative is directed speed. By launching an imperfect offer into live transactions, capital drops slightly, but market knowledge spikes with actual buyer behavior. Early entry extracts precise advantages you cannot simulate in a boardroom. It exposes real objections, tests exact pricing thresholds, and teaches you the specific vocabulary the buyer uses to describe their pain. The market rarely rewards technical neatness. It heavily rewards relevance, timing, and direct relief from a pressing constraint. Buyers will tolerate a rough interface if it immediately solves a high-cost operational bottleneck. Early entry is not an excuse for carelessness, broken systems, or security risks. It is a strict, disciplined restraint against building untested features that customers do not rank highly enough to fund. Delay is not neutral. It raises the cost of learning, hands your rivals time to frame expectations, and turns internal improvement into an expensive substitute for commercial exposure. Standard market analysis relies on broad industry labels and macro growth trends, but looking at the entire market hides the commercial truth inside generic averages. To locate early cash, we apply the process of decomposition. This fractures the broad market into highly concentrated zones. The target is the revenue pocket, specific, neglected edges of a sector where incumbents are weak and buyer frustration is highly concentrated. The first constraint of a revenue pocket is a high-pain problem, specifically an issue causing measurable financial loss or creating severe compliance exposure. The second constraint is supplier mismatch. Dominant incumbents are too slow or standardized, leaving buyers commercially trapped. The final constraint is temporal urgency with an accessible budget. A viable revenue pocket only exists at the intersection of severe pain, mismatched suppliers, and legally cleared money. You must identify this alignment to avoid two distinct traps. Buyers with a budget but no urgency will trap you in endless, polite meetings. Buyers with urgency but no budget represent trapped frustration and capable of converting to a transaction. When you find the true revenue pocket, you do not need to convince the buyer to create a totally new budget line. You simply redirect their existing hidden expenditure, like the cost of wasted labor or error correction, into your solution. You do not need to win the whole market. You only need to dominate the exact subset of buyers whose cost of waiting exceeds the friction of buying your unproven solution today. Founders often fear leaving money on the table, leading them to design broad, flexible go-to-market strategies. But trying to serve multiple buyer types at once destroys early-stage ventures by diluting their limited power. Broad entry creates operational chaos. It generates a wide spread of mixed objections, forces confusing, inconsistent pricing, and introduces unsustainable variations in service delivery that a small team cannot survive. This visual model illustrates the physics of market entry. Diffused force from a broad strategy bounces off the market surface, while concentrated force from a narrow wedge focuses all available energy on a single point of impact. To achieve this force, the startup must follow the strict rules of the wedge. Choose one exact buyer group, solving one exact problem with one tight offer. This hyper-specificity bypasses generic price comparisons. When the offer addresses the exact operational reality of the buyer, the startup can command premium pricing based on exact fit and speed, rather than competing on category averages. Narrow entry creates narrative compression. By solving one pressing problem for one specific buyer, the market immediately understands exactly what the startup cures, proving the mechanical superiority of the wedge through rapid, high-trust conversions. Once a startup secures early traction, a final seductive trap appears: the pressure to build the outward shape of a mature company before the income stream is truly stable. The symptoms are highly visible. Founders begin creating job titles, defining management layers, and purchasing complex software stacks. This structure is funded by pure optimism rather than predictable cash flow. Revenue visibility is an evidence-based understanding of how money will repeat. It is the only valid trigger for organizational growth. Roles like sales support only become rational when market behavior explicitly demands them. The structure must be built by cash flow itself. Building structure before you have visibility creates rigid overhead. It starves the company of the working capital it needs to quickly pivot when market realities inevitably shift. Do not build an enterprise in the hope of finding revenue. Find the revenue pocket first, validate it with an imperfect offer, and let the market's payments dictate the exact shape of the company you become.